Good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. A very warm welcome to all of you I guess, what is going to be probably our penultimate webinar for the year. Special thanks to those of you who are joining on the day prior to Thanksgiving. I'm sure many of you got a ton of things to do, and if you're making time for this webinar, I'm really thankful for that. So let's get started. The webinar today is forecasting, asking the right questions for business agility. It's a topic that is, I think, important to most leadership in most companies. The ability to say what is it that we will be able to do in a certain amount of time based on a certain initiative or a set of initiatives, and be able to then make reliable decisions based on that. So without much further ado, let's get into it. We will start with a few introductions, and then I'll give you a quick introduction to Digite and Swift Kanban for those of you who may not be familiar with us. And then we'll get on to the main session, forecasting, asking the right questions for business agility, for which I'll hand over the session to Sudipta Lahiri. And then hopefully we'll have a good animated Q&A session. We will, let's cover a few housekeeping aspects. If you go to the next slide. So we are recording the webinar, and the recording will be made available after the session is done. Please feel free to enter questions using the questions box that you see on the right side of your screen on the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll try and take as many of those questions as possible at the end of the webinar. So with that, so Sudipta Lahiri, he's head of engineering and products at Digite, and my name is Mahesh Singh. I'm co-founder and responsible for marketing and consulting at Digite. A little bit more about Sudipta Lahiri, or Sudi, as many of us know him as. Sudi and I go a long way back, and Sudi has spent more than 3 decades in the industry in IT services and product companies. And currently, like I said, heads our engineering and product management functions. He is, as many of you who know him, passionate about Lean and Agile, and has worked with a number of organizations to help them in their Lean Agile journeys, helping them, helping management and leadership understand the sort of importance of these sort of critical transformation initiatives that they go through for all kinds of digital transformation and other business transformation initiatives. And he's not only done that for our customers, but also worked internally at Digite for helping us become a more agile and more lean organization. Before Digite, Sudhi has worked in a variety of different large organizations, including IT offshore services companies and I2 and HCL. And he's had a sort of variety of different roles in terms of project delivery and business management. So with that quick introduction to Sudi, let's get on to a little bit about Digite for those of you who may not know us. So we have been around as a product company in the business of Lean, Agile, application lifecycle management, project management, tooling, and really helping remote and distributed teams worldwide to be able to collaborate effectively on software and other types of projects. And it seems ironic that at this stage, especially in the current times, we have become even more relevant than we have been ever in our overall history. We're headquartered in Cupertino, California, which is where I'm based. Sudi is in Bangalore. We are about 1 million users around the world. And Swift Kanban and Swifties are our main offerings for the Lean Agile side of your business if you're looking for tooling to help you there. I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to Swift Kanban. So Swift Kanban is really a lightweight as well as enterprise level tool for managing Lean Kanban initiatives in your organization, especially using Kanban, Scrum, Scrumban, etc. And also a variety of other things that obviously many of you already know about Kanban in terms of portfolio management, risk management, and so on and so forth. 60 to 70% of our customers tend to be, or maybe a little more, tend to be IT and software companies, but we also have usage of those in other functions, including marketing, legal, procurement, product design, etc. We have a very strong and powerful visual portfolio management capability, which includes a special capability that we have for defining portfolio lanes and columns, defining a very configurable multi-board hierarchy of work in the context of your work. We have a very interesting risk management capability that is part of our Swift ESP module that we have built in collaboration with the Lean Kanban University, or Kanban University now, which also includes statistical modeling and Monte Carlo simulation-based forecasting to help your teams become more predictable and more reliable in the predictions that they make. We are also known for, to go to the next slide, please. We also are known for a lot of our analytics. We provide pretty much most of the analytics that the Kanban method talks about, and a few more on top of that to really help you understand your flow and metrics and understand how you can improve your process and flows. And then finally, last couple of slides. Firstly, we integrate with a wide variety of tools using our SwiftSync platform, which includes multiple sort of technologies to help you integrate the way that you want to with your ALM tools or project management tools or ERP, CRM type of tools, so that we kind of sit responsibly in your overall tools ecosystem. And then just the last slide here on some of our customers, and you probably recognize a few names here. Our customers range from anywhere between 10 and 50, or maybe 50 to 100 users. 10 probably is too small. Although we do have customers that might start with 10-person team, to tens of thousands of users. So some of our customers have very large user bases, and we are able to support them with both cloud as well as on-prem deployments of our tools. So if you happen to be looking for any sort of lean agile tooling, do give us a chance. With that, I'd like to hand over to Sudhi. Sudhi, welcome to the session, and we're looking forward to your presentation today.
Hey, thanks, Mahesh. Let me just make sure that I have the right monitor that I am sharing, and you guys can see that. Can you see?
Yeah, you can see your presentation.
In the presentation mode.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great, awesome. So thanks, Mahesh. Thanks for that introduction. And we have about 50 minutes, so I hope to be able to finish it about 45 minutes and leave about 5-6 minutes for Q&A. So we have been doing these webinars in a series. This is a third in the series of webinars to essentially help business leaders work with this way of working that we call under the broad bucket of business agility. It obviously takes the thought process from lean agile working, but essentially that's the community that has been that is the literature that has been supporting the lean agile way of working for the most part. So we talked about a couple of other topics, and we'll talk about that earlier. But today, what we're talking about is how do we forecast, and when it comes to forecasting.
I'm going to interrupt you briefly. Your video seems to be going in and out, just so you're aware. If there's a problem, maybe we can just switch off our video. But if it is okay, then continue.
Yeah, it is okay. It actually, my laptop was going out of power, and I had to step up and get that connected. Okay, so we're going to talk about forecasting. How do we forecast the things that typically business asks for? What are those questions that, and how do we make sure that that those questions are answered in the right manner? So before we get deep into the topic, a quick definition of business agility, so we're all on the same page. So business agility is the ability of a system to respond to change, and we have had enough number of examples across the history that we all know of, where large organizations, successful organizations, have been completely disrupted by newbies in the industry, simply because they have not been able to adapt to the undercurrents of transformation that has been happening in their respective industry. So organizations have been aggressively wanting to have this capability, and clearly lean agile thinking is a strong foundation that enables organizations to be able to build that capability. Now, what we talked about in the first webinar is that if you want to be successful in business agility, we need to be able to deliver in terms of small, independent, testable work requirements. Why small? Because we started with the premise that in today's time, it's no longer possible to completely imagine a system from scratch, write it down, and then do a big bang development the way we used to do it. It's just not practical. If you look at any website, any complex application today, you just can't do a complete development in isolation, writing the specs from start to finish in Microsoft Word and then handing it over to a team and then making them develop for months and years together. So if that premise is accepted, then the only other way to make it happen is to be able to build stuff quickly, take it to the market, and get feedback whether we are on the right track. And if we want to do that, then it becomes imperative that what we are building is small, because only there is a function of size when we want to build something and deliver it fast. It needs to be independent. It needs to be testable. It needs to deliver value. Only then people will check you out and give you the feedback that you're wanting. Now, quality is assumed in the sense that you cannot, just because you're delivering fast, you cannot ship them bad quality stuff that then they think of themselves as a testing environment for you, right? So they'll stop giving you the feedback if that's the level of quality that you have. So today it is possible with all the engineering practices that we have in the community to be able to build quality from day one. And therefore quality is largely assumed in this whole ecosystem that we are talking about. In the second webinar, what we talked about is we need to move away from conventional models of estimation for several reasons. First, we explained that if we are talking about a changing scope based on market feedback, then what are we estimating? It basically puts into question all the assumptions and the scope that we are thinking that we're going to build, because we accept that as soon as we ship it out, we're going to feedback and we're going to change based on what that feedback is. We covered that relative estimation is far more fast and accurate as a basis of estimation. If you take any two objects in front of you, you can right now, as you're watching this webinar, perhaps you'll be able to say which one is heavier and which one is lighter. But if one asks you to say what is the weight of each of them, you will be at a loss to be able to give an accurate number of what is its potential weight. So fast and quick relative estimation is the way to go, so that you can do some planning and will actually use that way of estimation to be able to show how we can do forecasting today. And anything else is counterproductive, right? If you actually try and do conventional estimation models, and I've seen ton and ton of many organizations trying to use the same metrics and the same estimation models that they used to for executing in Lean Agile, it just creates more and more anti-patterns. What organizations try and do is convert 8 hours into one story point and then claim that we are doing agile estimation. Is completely beats the purpose, completely defeats the purpose of what relative estimation and what the Lean Agile concept and the literature talked about right from the beginning point itself. So let's get, with that background of what we had covered in the first two webinars, let's get into what we're talking about today. Firstly, the general assumption that people have made with Agile is that it's hard to forecast things. And for the most part, whenever if leadership or management asks the question, hey, when can we get this? How many people do we need? The answer is, you're getting it wrong. We don't have an answer for you. That's not the question that you need to ask. So first thing, it's important for us to understand in the Lean Agile community that why were we forecasting? And we were forecasting for multiple planning dimensions. We would forecast what we can get back to business with. We would forecast so that business can then plan all their subsequent downstream activities accordingly. Obviously, we need to forecast so that we make sure that we have the people that we need to do to make our goals and ambitions happen. We need to forecast so that we understand what the ROI is for any given scope of work that we're building, or what's the cost of delay if we are not able to get that in time. What is the potential impact, so that if we can't get it done in time, what do we need to do as an organization to be able to get it done? So you can't really get away without forecasting, right? You can't take a stand to say just because I'm doing lean agile, therefore I will not do forecasting. That is a pretty bizarre point of view. So it's important to understand why has the community taken that and try to avoid that question. Firstly, it again goes back to the same premise that if the scope is not frozen and it is dynamically changing, what are we forecasting? And the second premise is that, hey, I'm delivering value to you on a very, very high frequency basis. So what are you worried about? Your risks are significantly minimized. People are continuously seeing value. So why are you asking me for a forecast of the large, big picture commitment of when things are going to get done? And last but not the least, like I said, that it definitely is puzzling that if estimation is not accurate and an absolute, if you do not know that to build this program or this piece of scope will take me 100 hours, how am I going to plan based on? What is the plan based on if I don't have an absolute number of estimation for estimation? So it is puzzling that how do we use lean agile thinking to be able to answer the question that traditionally management teams use and leadership teams would get answers for. First, without a doubt, this way of forecasting is just not the way it works in lean agile, right? For the simple reason that we, like I said, we are delivering independent small stories testable on a continuous basis. Therefore, there's nothing called critical path, right? If you start delivering valuable cards right from month 1, month 2, month 3, sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3, sprint 4, then by definition you are delivered. The customer doesn't have to wait for a huge chunk of things to come together to be able to say, okay, does it, when am I going to get this whole scope together? So this whole approach has completely eliminated of what we used to do critical path planning, right? And then create what are the activities on the critical path, all that hours and hours of project planning that we used to do to be able to come to a magical deterministic number of when will this project end, that itself is thrown out of the window because we are delivering value continuously in small increments. But the question still comes up that when will it get done? If you want to get done a large theme or an or an epic, when will it get done? So think about a large scope of work, whatever you call it, whether it's a release or an epic or a theme. Your release might have a whole bunch of things you are delivering in sprints. And let's say you want to then figure out whether it will take 4 sprints, 6 sprints, 8 sprints, whatever be it. How much time will it take me to get this whole release done? Or if I'm delivering a large theme, when will that get done? But that's what we call as macro forecasting, which is that you take a big picture view to say, okay, this is when it will get done. And the simplest method that we in the community have been using, simplest and extremely accurate and practical way, is to use velocity-based forecasting. Anybody who's doing Scrum would understand this. I will talk a little bit about it, but fundamentally we understand what is velocity-based forecasting. However, if you're in a flow-based environment where work items are continuously flowing to you on a day in, day out basis, then this becomes difficult, right? Because you're getting work continuously, and now you need to be forecast one single card. You need to, when a critical ticket comes to you, you need to be able to predict and say whether I'm going to be able to get it done within the SLA time that I have to be able to turn this around. So you need to forecast an individual card that comes to you, whether it's a critical defect or a ticket, whatever comes to you. And that's what we call as micro forecasting. And this is where the lead time distribution that the Kanban community follows becomes important, right? Where it actually helps you to understand the distribution pattern that you have had in the past, and use that as the basis to be able to forecast when one particular card is going to get done. The reason why this approach doesn't work for a theme or an epic is because the size of the theme or the epic can be dramatically different, right? And therefore, to be able to extrapolate that is fairly error prone. So let's answer that question, or let's try and see how can we answer that question. When will it get done? The first recommendation that I have is that don't answer that question. Instead, ask the question, when do you need it? So ask the business, when do you need this? Okay, instead of you asking me, when can I get the whole thing done? When you tell me, Mr. Customer or Mr. End User, when do you need it? Now, it forces them, that question forces them to really think, when do I really need it? And if I really need by then, how much do I need by then? Right? Because they also, in most cases, understand that what they're asking for is a huge amount of scope. So they, at least in their mind, you're encouraging them, you're pushing them to think about, to say, how, in what installments do I need what from this overall scope? Now, often you will get an answer as of yesterday, right? Now, that's an evasive answer. And if you do get that answer, your answer should be, your response to that should be fair. If it is yesterday, let me go ahead and plan with my date. Let me say I'll plan for a quarter. And if that doesn't work for you, you tell me when you need it. So if you get an evasive response, you can always pin them down to a particular timeline that works for you. But it's important that you do get into that discussion with your consumer to say, when do you need it? And when do you need it will inevitably lead to the question, what do you need by when? How much of this scope you need by when? The second thing that I want to understand is that once you have that answer, now you can figure out that how much I can deliver in that timeline, right? If my entire scope can fit into that timeline, awesome. Realistically, that's a rare scenario that I have experienced in my execution life. So that doesn't happen. And therefore, then it inevitably leads into a question of prioritization, right? What can be fitted within the timeline that you have and that you need to deliver it. So there are a few approaches to prioritize. I did talk about this in my previous talk as well, but I would again like to cover this because firstly, I don't know, if many of you have attended the previous talk, but I think it's extremely important to have thoughtful approaches, powerful approaches to be able to tackle the problem of prioritization. Okay. So something that I find it very light and very practical is from the Lean UX body of knowledge, which we call as red roots based prioritization, which is essentially saying that, okay, if I have an epic and I've broken it down into stories, I have, let's say, 40 stories inside that epic from a story map or whatever process like that I've followed, you can immediately break that out and bucketize them into saying, okay, what is which of these user stories will be done, will be used by the maximum number of users, and how frequently they will be used. So you put them into a frequency axis versus a number of users axis, and you automatically understand that in this example, check notifications is one of the first things that we would like to work on. Create groups doesn't happen every day, by most users, so we don't need to worry about it. We can do it much later. So that's a simple way of prioritizing within an epic or a theme. What do I need to take first? But if you need to figure out at a feature or a theme level and prioritize whether I want to do epic 1 or epic 2 or theme 1 versus theme 2, then you need to do a lot more structured way of doing your analysis. And one of the favorite ones that I have that I really like is an approach that allows you to define multiple dimensions on which you're analyzing your themes or epics. Put some axis, define your axis for each of those dimensions, and then be able to actually take a particular card and say, okay, how would I rank this particular theme or epic on this dimension? Once you have done that for all themes and epics, you can actually go ahead and then use a filter criteria at any point of time to say, okay, give me the ones that match this criteria. Right now, let's say in this example, I have 7 dimensions. So the tool can easily match for you to say and give you a bunch of cards, suggest a bunch of cards for you where it matches 7 of those criteria or 6 of those criteria or 5 of those criteria, whatever the data may be. Now, so this way of working helps you to really prioritize on the epics or the features that you need to work on, because it's taking a lot more a big picture of what you need to build on. It's taking a lot more aggregate view of what you need to really prioritize and work on. However, Once you have taken that epic of the feature, if you now need to prioritize which stories you want to work on within that and which ones you need to work first, and if required, can something that can spill over the timeline that you have in mind, then you can use the red route planning based of approach to be able to say, okay, let me first figure and build the capabilities that are required, which are in the dark red, and I'll come to the light red circle, light red user stories much later. So it's a pretty effective way of doing user prioritization, and hopefully, if you're not using it, I would encourage you to try it. It's a lot better than than what many people do, which is just rank them. It's very hard to be able to explain why was one ranked one versus another, and it doesn't make sense to have a whole bunch of them called 99 and 98 and 97 and 96, because you inevitably then have the same problem. Which one amongst the 20 99 cards that I need to pick up? So just as plain rank based prioritization without using some approach like this, in my mind, is fairly subjective and fairly error prone, in all honesty. Now, once you have this, now it's a question of simple velocity based tracking, right? So for example, let's say if your theme delivery date is 30th of November, and you know then from your rate of velocity whether 30th of November is going to happen or not. Let's take in this example, it's going to get done by 12th of December. And you know that, okay, if 12th of December, if I do need to deliver by 30th of November, then I will potentially have a spillover of 7 cards. And now you can look at your distribution of cards and the size of the cards to figure out which cards you might want to take out. One thing that I would again like to highlight is many people just look at the release burn up or the burn up chart to figure out will it get done in time. That is pretty risky if you do not also look at the rate at which the scope is changing within that theme or the epic or the release that you're looking at. Because if you do have a dynamic scope, and most teams have, then clearly you need to factor in the rate at which the work is changing as well. So you need to see the velocity line at which work is changing, and you need to see the velocity line at which work is getting done. Then you need to take a call. So from the tooling perspective or from a charting perspective, obviously it can only tell you when the current inventory of cards will get over, but you have to look at it and say, okay, am I pretty close to the maturity of the am I pretty close to, or have I finished all my entire story grooming process and I will not have any more cards? Or no, my story grooming is still pretty in its infancy stage and I will have a lot of churn in the inventory of cards that I'm going to work on. So you have to take that subjective call depending upon where you are in the story grooming process. Now there are several critical success factors for this model to work. Firstly, you must have a full backlog, right? I mean, obviously, if you are only groomed 30% of your cards, then this approach doesn't work because you then don't have the full inventory of the cards to be able to predict when it will finish. It is also important that you do the velocity tracking at the lowest level of cards at which your team is going to execute. So you need to think about breaking the epic or the feature or the theme into your user stories or text stories or defects, the lowest level of card, because finally the velocity is happening at the lowest level of execution that the team is working on. So you need to break it down to that level to be able to see when will it get done. Like I said earlier, if you do not have small independent stories, it doesn't work. If you have a lot of dependencies, it doesn't work, because if you have dependencies, a lot of cards will be just waiting to get done until the whole testing cycle gets over, which means as far as velocity data is concerned, it will pretty much show 0, and therefore your predicted end date will be infinity. So it doesn't work. And last but not the least, the fact that you are extrapolating past velocity to predict the future means that all the broad constraints or the structure or the assumptions with which the past team was working will apply to the future, right? If that is not a valid assumption, then clearly you can't. Then this model fails, and then you have to kind of figure out other methods. So it's like, for example, if instead of 10 people, you're now going to have 8 people, then you have to kind of say, okay, what is the normalized velocity per person that we're delivering at? If with 10 people, we were delivering so much, how many will deliver with 8 people? And then you have to be able to understand at what rate, when will this predicted work will get done. But I mean, that's easiest said for perhaps team size change. But if you have instability because of the profile of people changing, or the tool set changing, or complexity, whatever. I mean, there can be n number of reasons that can impact your past productivity. Clearly, this is assuming that the past velocity is what will predict the future, or be used as the basis to predict the future. So we talked about the big picture forecast, right? Whether I have a theme, release, or something at that level. But now if I'm looking at having to forecast one card, when will this one card get done, right? Think of managed services, or where you're getting critical tickets, and you need to turn around in, let's say, a certain 2 days, 3 days, something of that nature. Many people make an assumption that just because you're doing Kanban, therefore even at a macro level, we should use distribution, lead time distribution. My experience is you're better off using velocity for themes and epics, simply because that factors in the size and the number of cards that are part of the epic or feature once that is groomed. If that is not groomed, then you can't use that as a basis. But once that is groomed, you can, and you can definitely use that basis. So now this might be familiar with most people who are well versed with Kanban, but the simple thing I want to highlight here is that a lead time distribution is nothing but a simple distribution curve of all the cards that you have executed in the past. That's all your lead time distribution is. The important thing is to recognize is the nature of this curve, which we call as it's not a typical bell curve, and therefore averages don't work. It's a curve which has a long tail. And therefore, the important thing is to recognize that whenever business asks you, hey, when will I have this critical defect fixed? Again, the question to ask is, what's the confidence level that you want to work? Want a response for? So if they say, hey, 80% confidence is great, and that's a production defect, then you can say, all probability 10 days you'll have it. But if they say, no, it's extremely critical and we need to be able to give, there's a whole bunch of things that we need to plan in the downstream, and marketing needs to be aligned, and blah, 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 and we need to really have a very high level of confidence, then clearly in this example, your response will be 25 days, right? So whenever you have to give that forecast, you must ask that question to say, what is the confidence level that you are expecting? Business knows that. Typically, whenever we have been asked in the past to say, hey, when will it get done? And you say 1 month, the immediate second question is, how sure are you? What's your confidence? So they know that this is linked to a level of confidence or a probability. It is just a question of you explicitly asking for a ticket. What is the probability? What is the confidence that they want the response for? Also, the more you aggregate this data, the more inaccurate this data would be. So if you just do one lead time distribution of all your defects and user stories and enhancements and tickets, everything bundled in one, it will be less accurate. If you slice and dice it in multiple ways, that represents the current card that you're trying to forecast. So let's say if you say, hey, it's a production defect of critical priority, or it's a production defect of medium priority, then you can actually look at the past distribution curve of similar defects in the past, similar issues in the past, and then say what your turnaround time would be. So we covered how to forecast what most people ask for from the business side. When will it get done? Remember, once again, first thing you should answer is, or first thing you should flip around and say, when do you need it? Once that question is answered and they give you a timeline to say, we need it by this time, and in all probability, you will get that answer with a scope that we need this much scope by this time, then you are in a position to be able to work out use these approaches to be able to get back to them and say, okay, by when we can actually get it done. What else do people forecast? What else have organizations tried to forecast? Um, Now, there are obviously a huge number of things, but from a planning perspective, these are some of the other things that typically organizations have been forecasting. They've been trying to figure out, do I have enough people to be able to do what I need to do in my future? Um, they have tried to get a sense of what my demand would look like. What is a pattern for my demand? And no doubt, they've also tried to look at what is the productivity that I'm getting from my current organization. The beauty is each of these things can be predicted without any incremental data entry. You do not need to even look at timesheet entry and hours of timesheet. You don't need to do detailed estimation, none of that. And hopefully will give you some approaches to be able to actually see how to plan for each of these dimensions. So let's start with the first one, which is forecasting capacity. Now, capacity planning essentially is done with the basic objective that we want to ensure that we have the capability and the ability to be able to deliver what will come up in the future. Now, the future, when you're doing a capacity planning process, is a fairly long term in the horizon. You are not doing immediate capacity planning for just the next, 1, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. Because if you do find capacity mismatch, it will take you a fair amount of time to be able to line up people, get people from the market, contract, subcontract, whatever you want to do. It's not something that you can do, on the flip of in the short term. So it's important to recognize that this is a planning cycle that happens over a longer time horizon. By definition, a gap between the rate at which work comes to you, customers give you work, and the rate at which you are able to deliver to them indicates a gap. Now, the gap can be for multiple reasons, but it is indicating a gap and an expectation gap between your consumer and what you are able to deliver. So these are the three things that become important when you're doing the whole planning process. First, the ability to understand the demand. What rate am I going to get work? Second, what is my current inventory already in the system, right? Because I might be having a huge backlog, and that might be there are already commitments that I've made to my customers and end users for the work that is already in the system. And last but not the least, what is my capability? What is the rate at which I can work? So let's take it one at a time. By the way, I actually, because most traditional, most organizations use the term resource management, and I hate to use both the word resource as well as the word management. Firstly, we need to be sensitive to the fact that we are looking at planning for people, number one, and managing by itself seems to have a connotation in many situations, which is that we have to manage something that is not good. And so I kind of dislike those two terms, and I prefer to use the term capacity planning leading to people planning. So let's look at the first of these, which is forecasting demand. Anybody using a simple tool will have data of this nature, which is at what rate per unit time does work come to you. That per unit time could be a day, could be a week, could be a month, doesn't matter. But per unit time, what is the rate at which work comes to you? Now, work comes in different types, right? It could be new initiatives of things, large scope or small scope of work, but which is value accretive. It could be non-value accretive, which is issues and defects and things of that nature. Now, depending upon how accurate you want this planning process to be, you can do it at an aggregated input level, or you can do it at a card type level. You can look at the small small enhancements and the initiatives separately, the issues separately, and the defects separately. So you could choose which option works for you, but it makes sense. My experiences, it makes sense to do it at an aggregated level, because beyond a certain level of detail, you're really splitting hair, and it doesn't really help you much in terms of accuracy in trying to do it separately for each of the different card types. But it's important to recognize that there are different work items that are continuously coming in. A common mistake that people often do when they're do capacity planning is only think about the value accretive cards. Okay, but and I'll show you some data down a little later that there is a huge scope of error out there. Like I said before, it is important to forecast this in terms of the downstream execution card types, because just planning for a theme or an initiative or an epic which has a huge number of cards can be very misleading, because the number of cards that you are trying to do it for can vary dramatically from one theme to another. And in most cases also, clearly the number of themes or epics, the data is not enough for you to have a real high, a lot of data that will give you a good distribution curve, and then you can do your probability analysis on it. So let's look at, this is Digitay's own data. So if I look at Digitay's own data, if I look at value cards, our average is 2.5 cards per week. Okay, that's our average. Interestingly, our non-value added cards, and this includes everything, right? Issues, tickets, defects, even perhaps tech stories. It includes everything. That is 7.36 cards per week. So what I want you all to recognize is that it is, if you plan based on only the value added cards that you have visibility on, you are inevitably going to be falling short in terms of your ability to deliver those value added cards, because you have not factored in the number of non-value added cards that the system generates to be able to deliver the value added cards. For example, you could have defects, you could have issues, you could have training needs, tickets, you can have any number of clarifications going back and forth. All those things that happen to make one value added card happen, it should be measured, and you should be able to factor that in, because that's an input to the whole planning process. Okay, so it's important to be able to understand these two buckets and understand what your card distribution is like and what is the data looking like. Once you have the data, once you have the demand pattern, okay, you have the velocity and the capability to be able to tell you very clearly what's your capability, right? What's your current productivity, right? What's your current rate of delivery, right? Now, like I said, it's very simple. It's very objective, no bias, but yes, it does make that assumption that the past is a representation of the future. So to that extent, you have to be cognizant of the fact that if those assumptions are going to change, then I need to reflect that on my capability suitably. So if, for example, you're going to have attrition, or you have a holiday season, or you have a lot of pardon my term, freshers. I think that's an poor way of putting it. But if you have a lot of campus recruits, people who have just joined the industry, and clearly they're going to come into the system, then you know that once they come into the system, your productivity will go down, because you'll have your team members training them and ramping them and bringing up to speed. So you need to make the manual adjustments to your capability that will make material change to the output velocity that you need to deliver. Now, as I said, if your rate of demand and is very different from from your capability, then clearly you have a big disconnect, and in all high chance that your customers will be upset for a long time to come, because they are asking you for at a rate much higher than what you're able to deliver. So you need to be able to factor in that difference between the rate of demand and the rate of capability to be able to understand and say, okay, what is the backlog? And clearly that difference is what will generate the backlog, right? The more the gap between the capability rate and the demand rate, the greater the backlog will be, because the system is not able to deliver at that same pace. So we talked about the demand pattern. We talked about the rate of work, the capability. What I want to highlight is specifically when it comes to these these big cards like themes, epics of that nature, what do you do? Because in all probability, you have not groomed it fully. You don't have the whole inventory of cards. That's a challenge that most teams have, unless they're all diligently using the full story map process, in which case you will not have the problem. But that's not the reality. I would say there is a large percentage of people who do not follow the story mapping process and who keep grooming themes and epics as they come along. So if you know that if I have that in my backlog, 10 themes or 10 epics which are already in the inventory, how do I figure out how much would bandwidth and how much capacity would they take to be able to complete those? And then on top of that, I have new stuff coming in. So one of the approaches that we suggest is that you use the same approach that we talked about earlier for user story, but you use it for your epics or themes. So you take your themes and epics that have been completed, that's a critical term. You take them as a starting point, and without looking into what effort has gone into them, you just rank them to say, okay, if I just look at this description, just like for if I was doing a user story level relative sizing, if I look at this theme, does it look bigger than this one, or does it look smaller than this one? If it is bigger than this one, I place it to the right of it. If it looks smaller, I place it to the left of it. So I just do a relative sizing of the themes that we have done. And then once you have done that, you can now, based on the past data for these completed themes, you can get an average of what different work items were created under these themes before they all got marked as done. So if this theme went on for 9 months, or this epic went on for a quarter, you can get a good accurate count, proper actual count, not even accurate is a misterm. You will get a proper number, which is how many stories, how many defects, how many text stories, just as an example, that we delivered as part of this theme. Now, the average is just a starting point because planning becomes easier when you're doing an average. It's important to recognize that when you have a large number of these cards, this also will have a distribution, right? And this distribution, again, you can say that, okay, what is let's say between 40 to 60% confidence, and you can work with that number. But an average is a good planning number because this distribution in all probability will be a bell curve distribution. It will be a Gaussian distribution. So therefore you can use the average as a basis of planning. Once you have done this, so once I've taken my themes which are already work in progress, or the themes which I have not even story mapped, but I know that they're going to come, themes or epics, now I can start building capacity planning what if scenarios. So what I can do is that I can say, okay, if this is my visible work, this is my new work coming in from the demand rate, this is the capability that I have. If I look at my today's system, we will have a growing deficit. We will not be able to meet all the aspirations of my existing commitment and the new work to be able to deliver this work with my current capability. Now, you can start doing a what if scenarios this way, right? That, okay, if I have to meet the current capacity, how much more capability do I need to add? And if you add the capability by 30%, just by doing a simple what if, you can see that my visible work will come down to pretty much zero by the time my planning horizon is, I'm doing the planning horizon for. You can do another what if scenario, which is what happens in our case, that, hey, we know from the past data that all of the work that comes in is not always executed, right? There are cards which are deprioritized, which are taken out, and that can be true for the past card, that can be past work items which are in the inventory. That will be true for the new work also, that could be true for the new work. So if I look the same data, and if I say that, okay, 25% of the new work or my past work will not get executed, then with my current capability, I know I will be able to clear the backlog at this rate of execution, right? So it helps you to understand, and you can do more and more modeling that like this, right? You can say, okay, I want to plan for 10% or 5% attrition. So then you reduce your capability by 5% and see what happens and how much do you need to improve your capability so that you can finish and make sure that your backlog is completely executed along with the new work by the time that your planning horizon ends. You can factor in for utilization, you can plan, so you can do more and more what ifs like this. The important thing that I want to highlight is that if you notice, there is an equation here that we have kind of assumed that I'm using capability to predict capacity. And that is definitely not the case. Capacity is a strong input to capability, but not the only input to capability. So if you look at all the other things that go towards capability, say productivity improvement because of new tooling, or productivity improvement because of incremental training, productivity improvement because of process training and lesser defects creeping into the system. So you can take all these parameters that go towards capability, model them in the what if scenario, and then see that for all those parameters and influencing factors, what is the net input that I need to then change to my capacity for this backlog of work to get completed. So I hope you are able to assess that yes, you can do people planning using a what if scenario model. And it's important to be able to do it in a what if scenario model, because this is never an absolute deterministic thing that only one scenario pans out in the reality as you go along. So we talked about demand for patterns, we talked about the capacity, demand forecasting, people planning, capacity forecasting. Let's talk about one more thing that most management and leadership teams love, which is forecasting productivity. Now, this is much more simple. You look at it, your throughput data. Again, this is our own past data, actual data from the live system. So we have a whole bunch of different work item types, and we measure the rate at which they're getting done. And you have a certain average number, which we take the last 3 months of average number, and we see what is the average number at to be able to predict the future. Now, the important thing is that month on month or time bucket to time bucket, there'll be variations. But what most leadership and management teams are looking at is what is the trend. And like you see here, our trend is pretty much in the right direction. The rate at which we are able to deliver value-added cards, which is the green line, that is increasing. The rate at which we are delivering the red cards, which is defects, is reducing. That makes obvious sense, because our productivity or efficiency or process improvement is happening. There is less and less defect leakage, and therefore there is more and more people and bandwidth that is getting focused to be able to deliver value-added work compared to non-value-added work. Now, this is at the throughput. This is the outcome level. You can convert this into another thing which most management and leadership teams work, and they get very upset if you tell them that we will not give you this data, which is the per person productivity. So again, we track, you can just track this without getting into any hours, estimation, time tracking, any of that, right? Because we don't want to do that. We don't want to do anything extra that Lean would consider it as waste, which is not customer value additive. So we don't want the teams to do anything extra. So this is just plain data. You are just looking at your team size that has delivered this output, and you just normalize that data, factoring in for whatever variations you might have had, and again you plot that trend. So if you look at our own trend, you can see that okay, our productivity for the card types is all coming down. So the system is becoming more and more efficient as we go along month and month. So it's the myth to think that you cannot give productivity metrics. You can. It's the only thing that we need to understand is how can we get it, and my contention is that it is far more accurate, because what we were earlier doing was based on a gamed number of estimation, and therefore it was far more inaccurate compared to anything that Lean Agile way of planning would do it. It was also inaccurate even in systems where that we're doing detailed time tracking, because we know for a fact that time tracking always was highly inaccurate. Most people would just log 8 hours no matter how much they've worked on. That's the ground reality. So therefore, we know the input is wrong. If the input is wrong, anything subsequently downstream is equally wrong. Now, forecasting this to the future is a plain extrapolation of the present, unless you know that some of those material changes, like I talked about, productivity, utilization, or tools, skills, some of those factors will change. And if those factors change, then obviously you'll have to factor in the productivity accordingly. But if that is not the case, this is a good example where the past can be pretty nicely be extrapolated to the future to be able to say, hey, what is the predicted productivity 6 months down the line? So in summary, want to reiterate that if you want business leaders and leadership to align to the objectives of lean agile thinking, delivering business agility, it is important to be able to answer their questions. It's important to be able to forecast what they need. And we can forecast most of the things that they're looking for. We can forecast based on different approaches about when something will get done. We can help them get a picture on what the demand forecast is going to look like. We can help them to look at and figure out what the capacity forecast is going to look like depending upon different scenarios that you might want to model on. I have not covered one last thing, which is we can even use within the body of knowledge a fit for purpose kind of an approach to predict attrition, because an approach like that helps you to understand what is a team internally is thinking about and what is their level of satisfaction, and you can then use that to be able to even predict attrition. We have not talked about it, but I just wanted to give you some insight that these questions can be answered as long as we are clear as to what is the basis of that of that prediction. And my submission is that that basis is far more accurate today compared to what we had in the past. I would like to end it here. I can be reached at the following Twitter or my email address. And like anything, like all my sessions, I hope you have found some value that you'll be able to use it within your teams and within your respective organizations. So Mahesh, with that, I'm ready for questions.
All right. I'm laughing because we are at the end of the time, and I know some people may have to go. So firstly, I wanted to just thank all of you who have joined today. And if some of you have to jump off, I just wanted to let you know that we have a year-end webinar coming up with David Anderson on the 14th of December, I believe. I may be off that date, perhaps, or maybe 10th of December. We will get to the right date before the end of the webinar.
It is the 14th, right?
It is the 14th of December. So if you are interested in exploring in more detail some of the concepts that Sudhi has been talking about here, David has planned a pretty interesting webinar end of the year. Please sign up for that. Okay, so Sudhi, obviously this is an area that is of tremendous interest. We internally discuss this all the time, given our own planning of product releases and what features should come up and so forth. So I guess starting off, and there is a bunch of questions that have come in, and I hope folks can stay to discuss those questions. But one quick point before we get into those is that in order for any of this to be possible, you've got to have data. And therefore, the current process that teams may be using, whether it is Scrum or Kanban or some hybrid methodology, unless you are measuring some of this data and tracking some of this data, most of this would not be possible. What's your experience in terms of teams that you've been working with outside of Digiday, in terms of what has been their maturity in tracking some of this data?
So the problem is valid no matter what model of forecasting or estimation that we use, whether we were using traditionally the models or we use this way of working, which is with the Lean and Agile, right? If you recall, earlier we used to have detailed estimation basis inputs, and then that estimation basis would become the the criteria to be able to predict future work. Now clearly you don't have an estimation basis if you don't have past project data, so that problem is always going to be there no matter where you start from. What we have tried to give you is a mechanism that if you have some data, I mean even as less as 10-15 epics done, 20 epics done, even if you have just that much data, that is more than adequate for you to be able to predict some of these things that your typical management and leadership teams are asking. Beyond that, till you have the data, your guess is as good as mine, and therefore you are anyway going to use gut feel as the basis and give your inputs back to them accordingly. But the important thing is to tell them that, hey, Lean Agile cannot give you this answer, which is a very common response that I see, is problematic, because that just switches off your leadership and management teams from giving you the support that you're asking them to give you.
Yeah, agreed. Most people believe that there is no element of planning or tracking because it is all agile, and therefore people believe that there is no ability to do measurements in the way that you described. All right, so folks, what I'm going to do is there are a few people who asked multiple questions, and they're all great questions. So what I'm going to do is to unmute you, and if you're able to talk on the webinar and ask your question, that'd be great. I'm going to unmute Deepak Amargolia. Deepak, if you can go ahead and ask, and I know you've asked multiple questions, so I'm going to ask you to prioritize which question you want to deal with first, and then I will go to some of the other people on the call. So Deepak, you are unmuted. You need to unmute yourself as well, and then go ahead and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. I have three questions basically. I think probably go with the first one that I had. Many of this, we assume that the business priorities or the business value is given by the business users who are involved with the software development team, right? What if we have a situation, which I think is the case in many scenarios, where we have a representative of the business users, not the business users themselves, who themselves struggle to get the priority or the business value coming out of it, right? So this is more of an exercise that they have to do internally before they can come to the software development team. How do we handle such situations? Do we have some methods or mechanisms to follow when we have a representative instead of the actual business users working with us?
So Deepak, good to hear from you after a long time, buddy. So I think one of the important things is that so one thing is to recognize that your representative person is obviously hand in glove with the business user, right? The more they are at arm's length, the more you carry the risk of your planning going off the mark. Now, many people respond to your challenge when you expose the challenge in them, and when you make them understand the challenge, when you make them see the challenge. My only submission would be that if you share with them that, hey, let us use these approaches of prioritization, then we can both, in a very systematic scientific approach, decide to say which one to take first and which one to take next, what to defer, what to take now. And when you have that conversation, everybody is making an educated, informed decision, which is very visual and clearly articulated, right? It's not then subjective and ad hoc. So my only thing would be that you use some of these methods that I was referring to along where your representative user uses it along with the people on the business side, so that they also have access and the ability to be able to prioritize using these approaches. At the end of the day, we all can only help people as much as they want to be helped, and as long as they want to be improved. If that is not a valid assumption, then clearly one is stuck to the original methods and saying, okay, you give me whatever it is and we'll take from there and we'll carry on with business as we go along. But most people, I would say, respond once they see the challenge and the obstacle cause in front of them.
All right, Deepak, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and give the mic to someone else. And if we have time, we can come back to some of your other questions.
Thank you.
Martin, thank you. Martin Ferreira. Martin, I'm going to unmute you, and you can go ahead and ask your question. You may have to unmute yourself as well.
Hello guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, my question is related to the, using velocity in a macro forecast. As far as I understand, if we use the throughput as the velocity of the thing, and we use that in a linear projection, we are hitting 50% of the confidence, you know. So that's why I asking if it's much better if we use like Monte Carlo or something probabilistic rather than deterministic approach. What are your thoughts about that?
So absolutely, absolutely. If you can, if you want to use simulation, the important thing, Martin, is to recognize what are you simulating, right? It's not just good to run 1,000 scenarios and then say what is the probability and the range that this will finish. You can do that. That's fairly simple. But the important thing is to understand: can I simulate the situation that I predict will happen in the future? For example, if I am expecting some people to leave, clearly, can I simulate that as part of my Monte Carlo? So I think it's important to be able to not just do a blind Monte Carlo simulation. That is definitely helpful, but if you can do a little bit of a scenario modeling when you are doing that Monte Carlo simulation, you will find the results accuracy increase a lot more. Okay. The other thing is, it's also a function of time. If, for example, in our own tools, we take an approach that we will not predict the future till we have at least 25% completion. Okay, pretty much an arbitrary number. But the point is that you need to have some basis of some past execution data of some quantity to be able to predict the future. Now, obviously, if you're making the prediction when you have only 25% complete and you're predicting what the 100% completion would be, it would be far more inaccurate compared to if you're at 75% and trying to predict what that 100% number would be. Correct? So those things are absolutely applicable and valid. By all means, if you have a Monte Carlo simulation, you can definitely use that. But my only input is that it's that most Monte Carlo simulations that I've seen do not they are not factoring in some of these inputs that can change in the future. They just do a simulation of equivalent to rolling the dice, for lack of a better term, to just simulate what it could happen. Okay, and so I'm saying yes, it is good, and one can make it better.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Martin. I'm going to pass the mic to Al Mansouri. I'm going to unmute you. And again, Al Mansouri, you got multiple questions. If you could prioritize which question you want to ask first, we will go ahead from there. So you may need
Hello.
to, yeah, there you go. Hi.
Thanks for hosting this session. My problem is a bit different than because we are leading some business projects that don't have much clarity like the IT projects. So my problem is with projects that span multiple years, and we are unfolding small modules or small themes as we go. How would we know that we are going on the right track? What will be some of the success factors that we can lean back to say that we're going on the right track?
So a slightly different question, but let me but it is a good question, and it's many people with that same problem. One is that whether you are able to meet the expectation of your customer or end user, if you're working in a lean agile manner where you are, like you said, rolling out in small modules on a continuous basis, two things become most effective to measure. One is something called an NPS score. If you're familiar with NPS, Even a better approach would be a fit for purpose score. Either way, either of those two are very effective ways for you to be able to measure and understand what's your customer talking about. Are they satisfied with what you're doing? But these two are subjective, right? They're kind of getting feedback. But the other very effective quantitative, one single metric that is an extremely powerful, effective quantitative measurement is lead time. The beauty about lead time is that you don't need to measure anything else, right? If your risks are very high, your lead time will increase. If your defects are high, your lead time will increase. If the requirements are not clear or they're very volatile, your lead time will increase. So if you look at systematically in how to do continuous improvement to anything that is impacting lead time, you will be able to step by step take a kata kind of an approach to be able to eliminate and figure out how to make your lead time get better. Okay, so I would suggest from a measurement perspective, those two things. From an planning perspective, it boils down to what level of granularity you have, right? So like I said, if you took my example where I did the relative sizing of my themes, now in your situation, you might be rolling out different modules and you do not have full clarity of the module, right? But you know that, okay, this module will be bigger than this module and smaller than this module. So you do a relative sizing of the module based on whatever you know at that point of time. You look at how much work of at the lowest level work has been generated from the past modules that you were working on, and you use that as the basis to say this module will be somewhere in that range. That's the best that you can do as a planning input to go forward, and that is adequate because all that you're trying to do is to have some basis to say, okay, whether I can finish this module in 4 sprints, 8 sprints, 10 sprints, correct? So from that perspective, you will still be able to get that answer, but that answer is only as accurate as the level of detail you have. So you have to apply your level of probability and confidence out there, but that approach is same relative sizing, and it's definitely more accurate than absolute estimation, right? So that whole thing that we used to do earlier of trying to write down detailed specs for that module and then make an estimate using function points and some method like that. Firstly, business doesn't have that much time. You need a lot of time to be able to develop an estimate like that. And secondly, you know that whole scope of the what you're expecting in the module could change. So that doesn't make sense. I hope I've been able to answer your question.
Thank you very much. Just can you mention again what was the first method? It was something like NBS?
NPS.
Yeah, it's
Net
called Net
Promoter.
Promoter. Yeah, it's called Net Promoter Score, NPS. It's basically a dipstick survey that you're doing on a continuous basis from your customers that indicate, and there's a certain model as to how you can arrive at that at a score. There's an approach to do that, and you can use that approach, or you can use something that we talk in the Kanban community called Fit for Purpose score. Both the methods are pretty effective.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have a quick question for you, Mansoori, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Are your questions in the context of software and IT projects, or
No,
not?
not really. We are doing some organizational changes,
Okay.
like departmental level.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm going to challenge Sudi on the question a little bit more. This is a question that I have seen asked in the context of non-tech projects. So take an example of the California Rapid Transit project, right? There is always the high-speed rail project. It's a massive project that has been discussed for over 20 years of building a rapid rail connection between Los Angeles and San Francisco. And obviously, if it is taken on, it's going to be a huge multi-year project. And so in the context of agile, building the MVP and being able to prove value is always hard in projects like that, where you build a segment of the track from, let's say, LA to Bakersfield, which is maybe 50 miles or 60 miles north of LA. It is hard to prove value of the project based on just that, because ultimately the value is achieved only when you deliver the whole project. But in the meantime, it is hard to get enough people to participate in this because it is too short a project. Is faster to drive, variety of different things. So are there certain categories of projects, not necessarily in software but perhaps other domains, where some of this may not be applicable, or where you have to have the whole project done in order to deliver value and then to be able to
Absolutely.
measure customer satisfaction?
Agile thinking is by no means the panacea for all industries in all domains. The fact agile, the whole lean agile approach is driven by the basic fact that you do not know what will work in the market, and therefore you need to deliver it fast and quick and get market feedback to be able to validate that.
Correct.
Thankfully, in the example that you give, which is which is in the construction sector, things are their engineering is a lot more mature than what we do in IT and software, right? If that work is distributed across 100 vendors and executed by 100 vendors, their blueprint would match to the dot in terms of what their specification and what where their track lines should meet and where it needs to converge. However, there might be dimensions of that which will still have risks. For example, if you want to know what kind of a design of that station would deliver more value, correct? Then there you might need to use these kind of thought processes to be able to simulate and take market feedback and get quick prototypes done and get that validated whether a design A is better or a design B is better. So there might be areas within that whole project where that thought process works, but in the core construction industry, engineering industry, it is an extremely mature domain for them to try and use this kind of thought process.
All right. I was just smiling again because of your comment on maturity of the construction industry. Going by the last remodel project that we did on our house, I discovered that it is not as mature as we think that it might be. Folks, we are way over time, so I'm going to actually have to close the webinar here. But thank you all for the questions that you asked. For the questions that we were not able to answer, we will get back to you. Sudhi will respond to the rest of the questions that we could not ask. And if you would like to connect with us, we have the contact information for Sudhi on the slide here. If you are interested in any of our products for potentially helping you measure some of the things that we provide, and many of almost I would say all of the things that Sudhi talked about are supported in our Swift Kanban product in one way or the other. Please check them out. And with that, Sudhi, thanks a lot for today's session. I think it was one of the probably the best session of the 3 that you have done so far, and I look forward to the rest of the business agility sessions that you go forward. Any closing thoughts?
No, stay safe, have a great holiday season, and we hope to have you forward, in the rest of the business agility series webinars.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for being here pre-Thanksgiving, for those of you who are joining from the US. And happy Thanksgiving and a happy holiday season to all of you. And with that, thanks very much. We will be in touch with you for the rest of the webinars for the business agility series, as well as David's webinar after this. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.